She whispered a dying wolf's last words to a stranger. He collapsed and said, "That was my son." There is an old saying in the hill packs of the Ashvale Range: a word carried faithfully is worth more than a life spent in silence. Wren Calloway had heard it first from her grandmother, who had pressed it into her palm like a coin and told her to spend it wisely. Wren had never been sure what wisdom looked like until the autumn she found the wolf dying in the ravine. She kept the coin too. Literally. A brass half-mark, worn smooth on both faces, that her grandmother had slipped into her coat pocket the morning she died. Wren touched it whenever she needed to remember that carrying something carefully, a word, a grief, a secret, was itself a form of courage. She was carrying it the night everything changed. Chapter 1. The Ravine. The Ashvale Range turned cruel in October. Its trails went slick with leaf fall, its ravines filled with shadow 2 hours before the rest of the world went dark, and the wind that moved through the pines sounded less like wind and more like something breathing. Wren had grown up on the eastern edge of the range, in the village of Coppermere, and she knew better than to take the Sutter Trail after midday. She had taken it anyway because old Bram Fenwick's goats had gotten out again, and 2 of them had wandered past the second marker, and Bram could not walk that far on his bad leg. She had the goats in hand, one rope looped around her wrist, when she heard the sound. Not a howl. Not the clean, declarative thing she associated with pack wolves. This was lower, a sound pressed out through effort, the way a note is forced from a failing instrument. She tied the goats to a pine and descended the embankment with more care than speed. The wolf was silver gray, enormous even in collapse, lying with his side against a boulder as if the boulder were holding him up. He had been in a fight. The marks of it were on his flank and neck. He was not going to survive. Wren knew this the way she knew weather. She had no wolf of her own. She was one of those rare, quietly shamed members of a shifter community who carried the gene but could not shift, could not hear the pack bond humming in her blood. She was, as her mother had said, without cruelty, but without softness either, incomplete. But she could read a dying creature's breathing as well as anyone, and this wolf was on his last few pulls. She crouched beside him. She did not touch him yet. His eyes found her, pale amber, enormous, already going distant. And something in them asked her to stay. "I'm staying," she said. His lips pulled back. Not aggression. He was trying to form something with his mouth. She leaned close enough to feel the heat still coming off him in irregular pulses, and she listened. He spoke 3 sentences. His voice was barely air. Wren repeated them back to him softly, so he could hear that she had them right. His whole body released. He died, with his eyes open, looking at her, and she reached out and closed them with the back of 2 fingers, because it seemed like the least she could do. She sat with him in the darkening ravine for a long time. Then she climbed back to the goats, led them home to Bram Fenwick, and walked the 2 miles back to her rented room above the Coppermere mill house, where she sat at her table and wrote the 3 sentences down on the inside cover of her ledger before she could lose a syllable. She did not know who they were for. She only knew they were not hers to keep. Chapter 2. What she carried. The next morning, Wren went to Elder Sable at the pack hall. Elder Sable was 70 years old and had the posture of a woman who had decided decades ago that the world owed her attention. She heard Wren's account with the stillness of someone filing every detail away, and when Wren finished, the elder's expression had shifted in a way Wren couldn't quite read. Not disbelief, not grief, but something adjacent to both. "Silver gray, you say? Large, even for a pack wolf, and east of the second marker on Sutter." "Yes. That will be Corvin Greymoss." Elder Sable said the name the way you say something you had hoped not to have to say. He was a wandering wolf, expelled from the Morn Pack of the Western Territories, 12 years ago now, a fighting offense. He seemed peaceful when he died. The elder looked at her over her spectacles. "You sat with him." "Someone had to." A pause, then something in the elder's face softened, briefly, before bureaucratic composure reasserted itself. "The words he gave you, do you know to whom they should go?" He said a name, Aldrich Morn. The room became very quiet. Elder Sable set down her pen. "Aldrich Morn is the Alpha King of the Western Morn Territories, the largest continuous packland in the Ashvale Range. He has ruled for 15 years. She paused. "He is also known to be difficult." "I imagine most Alpha Kings are." "No, some are merely proud. Aldrich Morn is the kind of difficult that comes from loss that calcified rather than healed. Corvin, if that is indeed who you found, was expelled from the pack over a challenge fight with a younger wolf. There was a death. Aldrich deemed it reckless aggression and cast him out." She looked at the wall for a moment. There were those who said the judgment was too hard. Wren touched the brass coin in her pocket. Then someone should have told him sooner. Someone tried. He has not been known to listen. Wren thought of the wolf's amber eyes, and the effort it had cost him to form those 3 sentences, and the way his body had let go once she had repeated them back. She thought of her grandmother's saying, a word carried faithfully, "Can you get me to Morn Territory? I can give you a letter of introduction to the border keeper." Elder Sable studied her. "You understand he may not receive you. His gates are not open to—" She stopped herself. "To wolfless women from Coppermere who work as ledger keepers for a mill house." Wren kept her voice even. "I understand. I'll go anyway." Chapter 3. The Gate at Morn. It took her 4 days on a hired cart, and then 2 on foot, because the cart driver would not take the high mountain road, and the border keeper's post was at the top of it. She arrived with blisters on her feet, mud on her coat, and the ledger book tucked under her arm, and she gave the border keeper, a lean, suspicious woman named Bract, Elder Sable's letter. Bract read it twice, looked at Wren, looked at the letter again. "You're telling me you want an audience with the Alpha King to deliver a dead wolf's last words?" "Yes." "You have no pack affiliation?" "No." "You cannot shift?" "No." "And you walked up the high mountain road alone?" "The cart driver wouldn't come." Bract folded the letter with crisp edges. "Wait here." Wren waited for 3 hours on a stone bench in the gatehouse while the wind came off the high peaks, and the afternoon light went bronze, and then copper, and then a deep, bruised violet. She ate the last of the bread she had brought. She touched the coin in her pocket. At last Bract returned. "He will not receive you today. You can sleep in the gatehouse. He will decide tomorrow whether to send you back." It was not a yes, but it was not a no. Chapter 4. The Morning Audience. He made her wait again in the morning, 2 more hours in an anteroom off the great hall of Morn Keep, which was built from the dark gray stone of the mountain itself, and decorated with no softness whatsoever. No tapestries, no flowers. The ornamentation was all iron and bone-white wood, which Wren thought told you something about the man who lived inside it, though she wasn't yet sure what. When they brought her in, she understood it better. Aldrich Morn was standing at the far end of the hall with his back to the door. He was watching something through the tall, narrow window, the mountain, presumably, and he did not turn when she entered. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, going silver at the temples, dressed with the functional austerity of someone who had given up caring whether he looked like an Alpha King. He looked like one anyway. It came off him in temperature more than appearance. The room was several degrees colder when she crossed into his half of it. 2 pack advisors stood to one side. They radiated discomfort. "You are the woman from Coppermere." Still not turning. "Wren Calloway." She kept her voice steady. "I found a wolf dying in the Sutter Ravine 9 days ago. He was silver-gray, very large, and he died before nightfall. I believe his name was Corvin Greymoss." She felt the change in the room before she saw it, like a pressure drop before a storm. "Greymoss is exiled. Whatever he said is not my concern. He used his last breath to say it, so it is mine." Now he turned. His face was hard, not ugly, but hard in the way of something that had been exposed to too much weather for too long. His eyes were pale gray, almost silver, and they went over her with the rapid, unconscious assessment of a man who had spent 15 years measuring threats. She watched him find no threat in her, and then not know what to do with that. You are wolfless. Yes. You walked the high mountain road alone. The cart driver wouldn't come. Something moved in his expression, too fast to name. Say what you came to say. Wren opened her ledger to the inside cover. She had not needed to write them down. They were in her the way the coin was in her pocket, present and specific. But she had written them because she was afraid of changing even one word, through the pressure of this moment. She looked at the page. Then she looked up at him, because she felt that the words deserved to travel from one face to another, not from a page to a wall. She said the 3 sentences. Aldrich Morn's knees buckled. He did not fall all the way. One hand shot out and caught the edge of the long stone table, and he held himself there, half collapsed, head down, and the 2 advisors took a step forward and he raised his other hand, and they stopped. The room was absolutely silent. When he lifted his face, it had completely changed. The hardness was gone. What was underneath it was something so raw and unguarded that Wren felt she had walked into a room she had no right to enter. That was my son, he said. Chapter 5, The Weight of 15 Years. She had not known. She understood in the aftermath of his words that she should have. Grey Moss, the expelled wolf, the challenge fight, the death. It assembled itself into a different shape. Corvin Greymoss had not killed a stranger. He had killed the Alpha King's son. No, she revised this again, watching Aldrich's face as he lowered himself into a chair and sat with his hands open on the table. Corvin Greymoss had killed the Alpha King's other son, the one he had then expelled. He was my youngest, Aldrich said. His voice had lost all command. It was just a voice now. Corvin, 8 years younger than his brother. He stopped, pressed his lips together, tried again. He was the sort of person who laughed too loudly at his own jokes and couldn't hold his temper in a fight and loved the high ridges in a way that embarrassed him because it seemed soft to him. He was 24 years old when I sent him out. Wren stayed where she was, across the table. She did not try to close the distance. He challenged his brother Rail. Rail did not want the fight, but Corvin provoked it past the point of refusal. Rail died. The pack demanded judgment. I gave it. He looked at the table. I told myself it was law. I told myself an Alpha King cannot make exceptions for his own blood. I told myself it would have dishonored Rail's memory to do otherwise. What did you tell yourself afterward? The question came out of her before she had decided to ask it. She expected the cold to return to him, the temperature drop of authority reasserting itself. Instead, he looked at her as if she had said something he had been waiting 12 years for someone to say. I told myself I had chosen the pack over my son, he said quietly, and then I spent 12 years not knowing if that was nobility or cowardice. Wren thought of Corvin's amber eyes in the ravine. The effort of those 3 sentences. Would you like to know what he said? Aldrich looked at her sharply. She had already said the words. That was why he was sitting here gutted and open. But she understood what she was offering was different. Not the message, but the context. The knowledge that his son had spent his last minutes of life thinking about him. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning. So she did. She told him about the goats, and the sound, and the boulder, and the breathing. She told him what Corvin had looked like. Peaceful, she said, because it was true. She told him about the amber eyes, and the way they had asked her to stay. She described the way his body had let go after she repeated the words back to him, and how she had sat with him in the darkening ravine because it had seemed wrong to leave. When she finished, Aldrich Morn had his face in his hands. One of the advisors moved to leave, giving them privacy. The other followed. The door closed softly. You closed his eyes, he said into his hands. Yes. You didn't know him. You owe him nothing. You sat in a ravine in the cold with a dying wolf you'd never met, and—" He stopped. "He needed someone to stay," Ren said simply. "So I stayed." The silence between them was no longer cold. It was something else, the quiet after a storm has broken, when the air smells clean and raw and the world is slightly rearranged. "I would like to give you something," he said at last, "for what you've carried." "I don't want anything." Ren Calloway. Her name, coming from him, had a weight she hadn't expected. "Please." She thought for a moment. "Tell me what the 3 sentences meant. I've been carrying them without knowing. It seems fair." Something shifted in him again, a slow, tectonic thing, like a wall deciding to become a door. The first thing he said, "I never stopped being pack." Aldrich's voice was barely controlled. "We cut a wolf's pack bond when we exile them. It is supposed to be complete, a clean severance, but the bond doesn't always comply with the law. He was telling me it didn't, that he still felt it, all those years." Ren thought of herself, wolfless, born without a bond to sever. She had never felt what Corvin had lost, but she had always felt the shape of what was absent. She understood something about carrying a bond that didn't comply. "The second thing," she prompted gently. "I don't blame you." He said it like it hurt, which is worse than anger. Anger I could have argued with. "And the third." He looked at her fully. "Watch the high ridges for me." The room was very quiet. "Because he couldn't anymore," Ren said. "Because he loved them. And now he can't." Aldrich rose abruptly, not with coldness, but with the unsteady urgency of a man who has been sitting in one place too long and needs to move before something in him fractures. He went to the tall, narrow window and looked out at the mountain. "I have kept his room exactly as he left it for 12 years. I told my household it was grief, but I think it was also guilt's waiting room, the place you sit when you believe a door might still open." "The door is still open," Ren said. He turned to look at her. "He told you he never stopped being pack. He told you he doesn't blame you. He asked you to watch the ridges." She was not trying to ease his pain. She was just holding the facts up to the light so he could see their actual shape. "Those are not the words of a closed door. They are the words of someone who wanted you to keep living on the other side of one." Chapter 6. What the keep was like after. He asked her to stay 3 days so that a proper burial service could be arranged. The pack needed a ceremony, a placing of Corvin in the pack's memory, with honor rather than shame. Ren had expected this to be a formality, a logistical reason to keep the witness available. Instead, he spent those 3 days in her company. It was not romantic exactly. Not yet. It was more like 2 people who had been carrying different pieces of the same weight and had discovered that putting them down in the same place made both burdens lighter. They walked the keep's corridors. He showed her Corvin's room, not from some morbid need to display it, but because she had described his son to him and he wanted to offer something back. The room had high ridges maps tacked to the walls, done in Corvin's own hand, and a collection of smooth stones that Ren recognized as trail stones, the kind you pick up for no reason except that they fit in your palm. "He was a collector," Aldrich said. "Most people who feel things strongly are," Ren said. "They need to hold on to the physical world." He looked at her with something she would later identify as the moment he began to see her clearly. On the second day, they sat in the hall after the evening meal, and he asked her about herself. Not out of courtesy. He was not a courteous man. She had already understood that, and courtesy from him would have felt false. He asked out of actual interest, with the focused attention of a man who had been spending 15 years paying attention to the wrong things, and had only recently noticed. She told him about Coppermere, about the mill house, the ledger work, the wolfless life. She told him without apology, because she had been apologizing for her nature for 31 years, and she was tired of it, and something about his particular rawness at this moment made pretense seem absurd. "They treat you as lesser," he said. It was not a question. "Most packs do with wolfless members. It's a category error," she said. They mistake different for incomplete. He was quiet for a long moment. I have made that error. You are making it a little right now, she said calmly. You are looking at me like I am a tragedy. I am not. I am a woman sitting in a hall eating bread and cheese at 8 in the evening. I am quite ordinary in the best sense of the word. Something cracked open in his face, and he laughed, a short, surprised sound, like a bird flushed from undergrowth. She thought it was probably one of the few genuine laughs he had produced in a long while, because his advisors in the doorway both visibly startled. On the third day, the burial ceremony was held on the eastern ridge, the highest reachable point of the keep's territory, because Corvin had loved ridges. Aldrich stood at the front of his assembled pack and spoke with the authority of an alpha king, but also with the specific, particular grief of a father, and Wren stood at the back, where she had assumed she belonged, and was surprised when he paused mid-ceremony and looked over the assembled pack directly at her and said, clearly, so that everyone heard, Wren Calloway walked the high mountain road alone to bring my son home. She sat with him in a ravine when she didn't have to. She carried his words faithfully when no one asked her to. This pack owes her recognition, and I am giving it. The pack turned to look at her, a wolfless woman from Coppermere in a muddy coat. She kept her face steady, though her hand went to the coin in her pocket. Chapter 7. The Leaving. She left the morning after the ceremony, because she had no reason to stay, and she would not manufacture one. Bram Fenwick's goats were probably somewhere they shouldn't be again. The Millhouse books needed auditing. She had a life, modest and real, and she was not in the habit of waiting for powerful men to decide they wanted her in theirs. Aldrich walked her to the gate himself, which his advisors had clearly not expected. He had his hands in his coat pockets, and he walked with the deliberate pace of a man who is slowing down because he hasn't figured out what to say. At the gate, he stopped. I don't want you to go, he said. Just that, plainly, with none of the rhetorical scaffolding she might have expected from an Alpha King. I know. She had felt it building over 3 days, not an infatuation, something sturdier and stranger than that, a recognition. Like two people who had been solving the same problem from different ends, finally meeting in the middle. I also don't particularly want to go, but I am not going to stay because you don't want me to leave. That's not a reason. He met her eyes. What would be a reason? Ask me something real. He was quiet for a long time. The mountain wind moved between them. She waited, because it seemed to her that this was important enough to wait for. I have been an Alpha King, and a father, and a judge, he said finally, and I have been all of them badly. And the only thing I have done right in recent memory is tell my pack the truth about you yesterday. And I think, he stopped, I think you are the first person I have spoken to honestly in a very long time. Not because you demanded it, because you made it impossible not to. He looked at her with those silver-gray eyes. Will you come back? Yes, she said. When? When the Millhouse books are done. He laughed again, less startled this time, but no less real. How long? 3 weeks. She picked up her bag. Watch the ridges in the meantime. His expression shifted into something warm and careful, the look of a man handling something he knows is fragile and valuable, and wants, very badly, not to break. I will. She walked through the gate onto the mountain road. She walked the first mile before she let herself smile. Chapter 8. What the books couldn't hold. She came back in 3 weeks, as promised, and then she came back the month after that, and the month after that, and at some point the coming back and the leaving became a conversation their whole lives were having, each trip carrying more, depositing more, the way a river reshapes its banks over many seasons. Aldrich wrote to Elder Sable. Elder Sable wrote back with a warmth that surprised everyone who knew her, including herself. Morn Keep acquired, gradually and somewhat improbably, a small garden off the eastern wall, because Wren had mentioned once that the keep had no living things in it, and Aldrich had taken this as a correctable problem. He came to Coppermere in the 4th month, not with a retinue, not with the full ceremonial weight of an Alpha King visiting a border village, but with 2 pack guards and a letter of intent submitted to Elder Sable 3 weeks in advance, because he had begun to understand that arriving at a woman's life like a conquest was not the same as being welcomed into it. The village watched him walk to the mill house with undisguised astonishment. Wren met him at the door. She had flour on her hands from helping the miller's wife, and she did not apologize for it. "You came," she said. "You said the books were done." He looked at her in the autumn light of the Coppermere morning as if he was still learning her face, which she thought was probably the best thing anyone could do with a face. "I wanted to see where you live. It's small." "I know." She showed him anyway. The rented room above the mill house, the sloped ceiling, and the small window that looked onto the water wheel, the table where she had sat and written down Corvin's words. She showed him the inside cover of the ledger. He stood over it for a long time. "I want to take this with me," he said, "not to keep. To copy it out and then return it to you. You already have the words. They should be in his room, on the wall with his maps." She gave him the ledger. He was careful with it, as she had known he would be. He was a man who had spent 15 years being careful with the wrong things, with law and with appearances and with the armor of office, and was now, with unpracticed intensity, trying to be careful with the things that actually mattered. That evening they walked the Coppermere Trail along the mill pond, and the October light made everything gold and amber, and he told her about Rael, the older son, the one who had died, the one he had also failed in a different way, and she listened without trying to fix it, because some things are not fixable, they are only bearable, and what makes them bearable is being told to someone who will not look away. He asked her, by the edge of the water, if she thought she could ever love a difficult person. "I already do," she said. "I'm waiting to see if you'll let me." He took her hand and held it, and said nothing else, because nothing else was needed. Epilogue. 1 year later. Morn Keep, the following October, there was a garden now off the eastern wall. It had been planted in spring, tended through summer, and in this particular October morning, it held the last of the season's herbs, and one stubborn rosebush that Wren had relocated from Coppermere, and which had adapted to mountain altitude, with an obstinacy she found personally relatable. She was in the garden when Aldrich found her, which was where he usually found her at this hour. She had her hands in the earth, and her boots were muddy, and the mountain wind was doing its usual thorough work on her hair. He stood at the garden gate for a moment before coming in. She had noticed he did this sometimes, arrived and paused, as if he was making a private inventory of gratitude before stepping into the scene. She never pointed it out. She thought it was the most intimate thing about him. "Elder Sable's letter came," he said, sitting on the stone bench at the edge of the bed. "And?" "She wants to perform the ceremony here rather than in Coppermere. She says the mountain light is better." A pause. "I think she just wants to see the keep. She has been curious about you for a year. She disapproves of me. She disapproves of everyone. It is her form of affection." Wren sat back on her heels and looked at him. In the year since Corvin's burial, the hard weather had not left his face. She did not think it ever would, and she did not want it to, because it was his, the evidence of what he had survived. But there was something alongside it now. An open place. A spot where light got in. "She told me last month that you were less of a disaster than she had initially predicted. For her, that's nearly a poem." He laughed. She still loved making him laugh. She expected she would love it for a very long time. She pulled off her garden gloves and came to sit beside him on the bench. From here, they could see the eastern ridge, gray-green against the pale morning sky. On clear days, she could see the farthest point of the high ridges from this bench, the places Corvin had mapped in his room with his own hand. "I have been watching them," Aldrich said quietly. "I know." She leaned into him, her shoulder against his arm. "I see you doing it." "It's still—" He stopped, then tried again. "It still feels wrong that he's not up there. And also somehow like he is. Both things at once. That's what it is to grieve someone you loved, she said. The wrongness and the presence, both at once. He turned and looked at her, and she felt, as she often did, the particular quality of his attention, the way he had learned to really look at her, past the wolfless woman from Coppermere category, past anything except what was actually there. It had taken him time. He was stubborn. But he had done it. A word carried faithfully, he said. She looked up at him. You told me that once, he said. Your grandmother's saying. I've been thinking about it. I don't remember telling you. You didn't say it directly. You said something like it when you were describing why you wrote the words down in the ledger. He paused. I think it is the truest thing I have heard. More than law, more than pack bond, more than any of the things I thought mattered most. He looked at the ridge. You carried his words faithfully when no one asked you to, and they cracked me open. Changed the entire shape of my life. A pause. Of our lives. She slipped her hand into her coat pocket and felt the brass half-mark there, worn smooth on both faces. Her grandmother's coin. She had carried it through the ravine, through the gatehouse, through the hard morning audience when his knees had buckled, through the 3 weeks back in Coppermere when she hadn't been sure if hope was warranted. She had carried it to every conversation they had ever had, a small cold weight that reminded her what faithfulness looked like. She took it out and set it in his palm. He looked down at it, turned it over. It's worn through, he said. Both sides. My grandmother carried it her whole life before me. She closed his fingers around it. It has no face left on it. It could be anyone's. It could be from anywhere. She looked at him. That's the point, I think. It doesn't matter what it was. It matters what it was used for. He held it for a long time. Then, stay. Aldrich, not because I don't want you to leave. His voice was low and careful, and entirely real. Because I would like, very much, to spend the rest of my life learning your face. He turned toward her on the bench, the coin still in his hand. Because you are the least incomplete person I have ever met, and I was a fool for a long time, and I would like to spend whatever years I have left being less of one. Below them, the keep was waking up. She could hear the kitchen fires being lit, the soft sounds of the pack's morning beginning, the distant voice of someone calling an early greeting across the courtyard. She thought of the ravine 1 year ago, the amber eyes, the effort of 3 sentences, the dying wolf who had needed someone to stay. She thought of her grandmother pressing a coin into her palm. She thought, a word carried faithfully is worth more than a life spent in silence. Yes, she said. I'll stay. The morning light moved across the ridge. Somewhere above them, on the high places, the wind was moving through the pines, and it sounded, if you were quiet enough to hear it, less like wind and more like something at rest. End.